Hey, babe, come meet my fat friend. I'm serious, she's the biggest eater I've ever met. If food could talk, it would beg her for mercy. She's huge. Hey, it's not funny. Oh, come on, it's hilarious. I was just hungry. No wonder she's still single. Who would want to date someone who can't even control herself?
She stood in that kitchen doorway, uninvited laughter still ringing in her ears, and made herself a quiet promise. Nobody gets to do that to me again. What nobody in that room knew, not her so-called best friend, not the stranger she'd just been humiliated in front of, was that this wasn't the end of Emma's story. It was the moment it actually started. By the end of this video, the woman who once apologized for taking up space in a room won't just walk into one. She'll own it. And the friend who thought she'd never face consequences? She's about to learn exactly how wrong she was, just not in the way you're expecting. If you're new here, welcome to African Tales by Mira. Hit subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and drop something positive down there before we start. It genuinely makes my day, and it helps this story reach someone who might need it. Now, let's get into it. And don't leave yet, because what this story is about will shock you. Emma Whitfield grew up in a house with a circular driveway, a housekeeper who called her sweetheart every morning, and a father who ran a logistics company that kept him traveling 3 weeks out of every month. Her mother sat on the boards of 2 hospitals and a private school foundation. Nobody in that family ever had to think twice about money. New shoes arrived before old ones wore out. Tutors came to the house instead of the other way around. Summer meant a lake house 2 hours north, not a summer job. To anyone looking in from outside, Emma had the kind of life other people daydreamed about. But money never once fixed the thing that actually hurt. Emma had been a heavier kid for as long as she could remember, and the world made sure she never forgot it. In 3rd grade, a boy named Kyle Foster nicknamed her Balloon during a game of dodgeball, and somehow it followed her through 3 different schools and 11 years, whispered in hallways, scrawled once on a bathroom stall she never told anyone about. At family dinners, she noticed the way certain relatives glanced at her plate before they looked at her face, a habit so automatic they probably didn't even realize they were doing it. At 14, she overheard her own aunt in the kitchen during a Thanksgiving gathering. "She has such a pretty face," her aunt said to Emma's mother, voice lowered, but not lowered enough. "It's such a shame about the weight." Emma was standing 3 feet away, refilling a water pitcher. Her aunt never knew she'd heard it. Emma never told her she had. She simply carried the water pitcher back to the table and smiled through the rest of dinner like nothing had happened at all. She learned early that laughing at herself first hurt less than waiting for someone else to do it. She became the funny one at school, the one who made the joke before anyone else could, the one who said, "It's fine, I'm used to it," so often that even she started to believe there was nothing else she deserved to feel. At home, alone at night, it was different. She'd sit cross-legged on her bedroom floor in front of the full-length mirror some nights and just study herself, turning slightly one way and then the other, hunting for an angle where she recognized someone she actually liked looking at. Most nights, she didn't find one. She'd turn off the light before she could look too long. When her acceptance letter to Ashford University arrived in a thick cream envelope, she didn't just feel proud. She felt something closer to desperate hope. A new city, a new dorm, a room full of people who had never called her Balloon in 3rd grade, who had never watched her grow up, who had no history with her at all. She promised herself, packing her bags that August, that this was where she'd finally become someone new. The first few weeks tested that promise harder than she expected. In lecture halls, the seats beside her filled up last, if they filled up at all. Students would rather stand than sit next to the quiet, heavy girl in the back row, and Emma noticed every single time, even when she pretended not to. In the dining hall, she perfected the art of eating quickly with one earbud in, staring hard at her phone, so nobody would clock how often she was sitting completely alone. Group projects were their own quiet humiliation. Teams would form in seconds, laughing, already exchanging numbers, and Emma would be the name left over, assigned wherever there happened to be an empty seat, never actually chosen. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself a great many things, that first semester, most of them untrue. If you've ever felt invisible in a room full of people, sitting there, technically included but not really seen, you already know exactly what that feels like. And if this story is hitting close to home already, this is a good time to hit that subscribe button, drop where you're watching from tonight in the comments, and leave a kind word for someone else scrolling through later. It matters more than you'd think. Okay, back to Emma. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in October, everything shifted. Emma was sitting under an old oak tree near the campus library, eating a sandwich by herself, one earbud in, as usual, when a shadow fell across her open textbook. "Is this seat taken?" She looked up, a girl with sleek dark hair, sharp winged eyeliner, and the kind of easy confidence Emma had always secretly envied was standing over her, smiling like they were already old friends. "No. Go ahead," Emma said, a little surprised. The girl dropped down beside her, like she'd been doing it for years. "I'm Chloe, first year business school. You look like you're actually paying attention in class, unlike literally everyone I've met so far." Emma laughed, a real laugh, the kind that caught her off guard a little. "Emma, and honestly, I'm just really good at looking like I'm paying attention." They talked for nearly 2 hours that afternoon. About professors, about home, about nothing important at all. And it was the nothing important conversation Emma had missed the most. The kind you only get once someone decides you're worth sitting next to. When she finally walked back to her dorm that evening, she felt lighter than she had in months, maybe years. What she didn't know, what she had absolutely no way of knowing yet, was that Chloe had clocked something within the first 5 minutes of that conversation. The tailored jacket that clearly wasn't from a mall. The driver idling near the east gate, that Emma mentioned casually, like it was nothing. The easy, unthinking way Emma had handed a stranger raising money for a campus fundraiser a $20 bill without so much as blinking. Chloe's own family didn't have any of that. Her mother worked double shifts, folding linens in a hospital laundry facility. Her father had left when Chloe was 9 and hadn't sent so much as a birthday card since. Every semester at Ashford was a quiet, exhausting negotiation between tuition, rent, and groceries. And Chloe had promised herself years ago, lying awake in a small apartment above a laundromat, that one day that scramble would end, by whatever means necessary. Somewhere in the back of her mind, walking away from that oak tree that afternoon, an idea had already started to take shape. It wasn't friendship, not really. It was closer to a plan. Over the next 4 years, Emma and Chloe became inseparable, or at least, that's exactly how it looked from the outside. They studied together, or at least sat in the same corner of the library, while Chloe scrolled through her phone, and Emma quietly finished both of their assigned readings. They went to parties together, where Chloe worked the room effortlessly, and Emma hovered near the drinks table, simply grateful to belong to somebody's circle for once. They spent Thanksgivings and spring breaks together, whenever Chloe couldn't afford a flight home, and Emma's parents welcomed her without a second thought, setting an extra plate at the table, like it had always been hers. Behind Emma's back, though, a very different version of the friendship was being told. One night during sophomore year, a small group of girls sat in Chloe's dorm room, passing around a shared bag of chips, half watching a movie nobody was really paying attention to. "Okay, but seriously," one of them said, muting the TV. "Why are you always with Emma? No offense, but you two don't exactly match." Chloe rolled her eyes. Though there was a smile underneath it, she didn't bother hiding. "You guys worry too much." "No, really," another pressed, leaning forward. "What's the actual deal?" Chloe leaned back against her pillows, lowering her voice like she was letting them in on a secret worth having. "Look, her family has real money. Not comfortable money. Real money. And she's so desperate for a friend that she'll do basically anything to keep me around. Why on earth would I say no to that?" "So you're using her?" Chloe shrugged, entirely unbothered, popping a chip into her mouth. "I prefer the word strategic." The room dissolved into laughter. Nobody in it felt so much as a flicker of guilt, least of all Chloe. Meanwhile, the pattern only deepened. When Chloe came up short on tuition one semester, Emma quietly covered the difference without a second thought, waving off any mention of paying her back. When Chloe admired a jacket in a shop window on a random Saturday, it somehow appeared in her closet within the week, a just because gift from Emma, no occasion required. When Chloe was hungry at midnight, she'd knock on Emma's door without hesitation, and Emma would split whatever she had, no questions asked, every single time. Emma told herself this was simply what real friendship looked like. Generous, easy, unconditional. The way she'd always imagined it would be, if she ever found someone who actually wanted to stay. She didn't examine the quieter, sadder truth underneath it. That she was terrified if she ever stopped giving, Chloe would stop staying. Being needed felt so much safer than being unseen. By senior year, through a connection made at one of her father's dinner parties, Emma quietly arranged interviews for both of them at a well-regarded marketing firm downtown. Chloe got the job. Emma got the job. Chloe screamed with joy over the phone to her mother that night, describing it breathlessly as the biggest win of her entire life, without once mentioning whose name had actually opened that door. "Let's get an apartment together," Chloe suggested a few weeks later, over coffee, like it was the most obvious idea in the world. "It'll be so much fun. Real adult life. Finally, the two of us." Emma's whole face lit up. "Really? You want to?" "Of course. We're basically sisters at this point, aren't we?" Emma agreed, before Chloe had even finished the sentence. The apartment they moved into sat in a good part of the city, with tall windows overlooking a small park and a doorman who learned both their names within the first week. It was funded, almost entirely, by Emma. The security deposit came straight from Emma's savings account. The furniture came from a weekend shopping trip Emma quietly paid for, because it's just easier that way. Don't worry about it. Emma's parents sent grocery deliveries every other week without ever being asked. Emma covered the larger share of the rent because her salary happened to be slightly higher, an arrangement that somehow never got revisited once Chloe's paycheck grew too. At first, it genuinely did feel like the life Emma had always pictured for herself. 2 friends, 1 apartment, cheap wine on a Friday night, inside jokes nobody else would ever understand. But slowly, cracks began to show. Chloe started inviting friends over, without any warning at all, sometimes 5 or 6 people at once, filling the small living room with noise and cigarette smoke drifting out the cracked window until well past midnight, even on work nights. Emma would come home after a long shift to find total strangers sprawled across her couch, snacks she never bought scattered across the coffee table, and the good wine she'd been saving for a special occasion already half gone, the cork nowhere to be found. One evening, after finding the apartment trashed for the 3rd time that month, Emma finally worked up the courage to say something. Chloe, I don't mind your friends coming over. I really don't. Could you maybe give me a little notice next time? Even just a text would help. Chloe's expression shifted instantly, defensive in a way that felt disproportionate to the ask. Wow. Okay, I didn't realize I needed permission to have people over in my own apartment. That's not what I meant. You're being kind of controlling right now, not going to lie. Emma's shoulders dropped, the fight already draining out of her. I'm not trying to control anything. I just wanted a little notice, that's all. Chloe sighed dramatically, the exact sigh she always used when she wanted a conversation to end squarely in her favor. You're so sensitive sometimes. Honestly, it's exhausting to keep tiptoeing around you. And, like clockwork, Emma found herself apologizing. You're right, I'm sorry. Forget I even brought it up. Chloe's mood brightened instantly, like a switch flipping. It's fine, don't worry about it. The pattern held for years after that night. Emma gave, Chloe took. Emma apologized for asking for basic consideration in her own home. Chloe demanded more, and somehow always managed to frame herself as the reasonable one in the room. One of them called it friendship. The other called it convenient. And for a long time, only one of them ever seemed to notice the imbalance, sitting quietly underneath it all. It was a quiet Sunday in early spring, the first genuinely warm day after a long grey winter. Emma sat on the front steps of the apartment building with a bowl of pretzels balanced on her knees, enjoying the breeze, her sneakers kicked off beside her. Moments like that had quietly become her escape. No noise, no passive-aggressive comments, no bracing herself for the next thing she'd end up apologizing for. She heard the gate at the bottom of the steps creak open. Chloe walked in, and beside her was a man Emma had never seen before, tall, well-dressed, in a way that looked effortless, rather than trying, carrying himself with quiet, easy confidence. Emma's whole face lit up instantly. In 4 years, Chloe had never once brought a boyfriend around. Not one. This felt like a real moment, a milestone in their friendship worth being excited about. She stood up quickly, brushing crumbs off her jeans, already smiling. Chloe, you didn't tell me you were bringing someone over. For a brief second, Emma genuinely expected Chloe to smile back, maybe introduce him properly, maybe even look a little nervous, the way people do when they actually want their best friend's approval. Instead, Chloe burst into loud, sharp laughter, the kind that carried, the kind meant to be heard. She turned to the man beside her and pointed directly at Emma, still laughing. Babe, meet my fat friend I've been telling you about. Emma's smile vanished instantly. For half a second, she genuinely thought she'd misheard. Chloe wasn't finished. Seriously, eating is basically her full-time job at this point. I keep telling her, if food could run, it would sprint away from her the second it saw her coming. She laughed hard at her own joke, loud enough that a neighbor's curtain twitched 2 floors up. The man, Daniel, though Emma didn't know his name yet, visibly flinched, his jaw tightening in a way Chloe either didn't notice or didn't care about. She kept going anyway, performing now for an audience of exactly 1. Honestly, you should see her plate at dinner. It's basically a full production, front row seats only. Emma stood frozen on the steps, her fingers tightening around the bowl of pretzels until her knuckles went pale. Her throat closed up completely. This wasn't a stranger on the street mocking her. This was the person she had called her best friend for 4 straight years. The person whose tuition she'd quietly covered more than once. The person she'd handed her house keys to without a second thought. The person she had trusted completely with almost everything. Without a single word, Emma turned and walked into the building. She didn't run. Some small wounded part of her refused to give Chloe the satisfaction of a scene. But the moment her apartment door clicked shut behind her, she sank onto the edge of her bed and cried harder than she had in years, the bowl of pretzels still clutched in her lap, forgotten. Outside, a heavy silence settled over the front steps between Chloe and Daniel. "What?" Chloe asked, finally noticing his expression. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Daniel shook his head slowly, like he was seeing her clearly for the very first time. "Chloe, what was that?" "It was a joke. A joke makes people laugh. She just walked away in tears, in front of both of us." "You're being dramatic. She's used to it." "Used to it," Daniel repeated flatly. "That's supposed to make it okay. Come on, Daniel. Don't make this into a whole thing." "No," he said, his voice sharpening now. "I don't think you're taking this seriously enough." That woman's face lit up the second she saw us walk through that gate. She looked genuinely happy for you, and within 30 seconds, you humiliated her in front of a complete stranger, for a laugh. Chloe tried to laugh it off one more time, but it came out thin and unconvincing. "You're overreacting." Daniel took a long breath, steadying himself. "I don't think I want to keep seeing you." Her eyes went wide. "You're seriously ending things over this?" "I'm ending things because of what this just showed me about who you actually are," he said quietly. "If this is how you treat someone you call your best friend, someone who's clearly given you everything, from the look of that apartment, I don't want to find out how you treat me a year from now." He turned and walked back out through the gate without looking back. Chloe stood there, alone on the front steps, stunned, already replaying the last 5 minutes and quietly rearranging the facts in her head until none of it was her fault. "This is Emma's fault," she muttered under her breath, arms crossed tight. If she hadn't gone running off inside like a child, none of this would have happened. Quick pause here. If you're enjoying this story so far, this is exactly the moment to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know where in the world you're watching from tonight, down in the comments. And if you've got 60 seconds to spare, leave a positive comment for someone else reading through later. It really does make a difference. All right, back to the story. Weeks passed, then months. Emma didn't forget that afternoon. Some wounds don't fully close. They simply stop being the very first thing you think about the moment you wake up. But slowly, the sharpest edge of it began to dull. She threw herself into work, staying late more often than she needed to. She started taking long walks alone on weekends, through the park near the apartment. Not to lose weight, just to think, just to breathe somewhere that wasn't full of Chloe's noise. She kept the apartment, even after Chloe quietly moved out following the breakup with Daniel, unable to cover the rent alone. Then, on an entirely ordinary Saturday afternoon at the grocery store, standing in the cereal aisle with a basket half full, a voice called her name from behind. "Emma?" She turned, confused, scanning the face for a moment before recognition finally landed. "Oh, Daniel, right?" He smiled, a little sheepish. "Yeah, wasn't sure you'd even remember me." "It's hard to forget the day my best friend humiliated me in front of a total stranger," Emma said, then immediately winced at how sharp it came out. "Sorry, that was harsher than I meant it to sound." "No, don't apologize," Daniel said quickly, shaking his head. "Honestly, I've actually wanted to run into you again for a while now. I owe you an apology of my own." Emma frowned, setting a box of cereal back on the shelf. "For what? You didn't even say anything that day." "Exactly," Daniel said. "I stood there and let it happen for way too long before I finally said something. I ended things with Chloe that day, for what it's worth. But I should have spoken up the moment it actually mattered, while you were still standing right there." Emma looked down at her shopping basket, unexpectedly emotional, over a conversation happening between the cereal and the canned soup. Nobody had ever acknowledged that afternoon out loud before, not once. "Thank you," she said softly. "That actually means something to hear." For what it's worth, Daniel added, I never agreed with a single word she said that day. Not one. Emma managed a small smile. That's kind of you to say. There was a pause, and then Daniel, looking a little nervous for what seemed like the first time since she'd known his name, said, Can I be honest about something else? Emma braced herself, half expecting pity. Sure. You're beautiful, Emma. She nearly laughed out loud, right there by the cereal. Not because it was funny, but because the sentence sounded so foreign in her own ears. People had told her she was smart, generous, funny, easy to talk to, dependable in a crisis. Nobody had ever told her, plainly and without a single qualifier attached, that she was simply beautiful. You don't have to say that, she said quietly, looking away. I'm not saying it to be nice, Daniel replied. I'm saying it because it's true, and I don't think anyone's ever told you that in a way you actually let yourself believe. Emma didn't know what to say to that. For the first time in longer than she could remember, someone was looking at her without a trace of pity or judgment behind their eyes. Just plain, quiet admiration. And somewhere underneath the discomfort of it, a small, long-buried part of her wondered, for just a moment, if maybe she'd spent years seeing herself through the wrong pair of eyes entirely. A few days later, her phone rang. Daniel's name lit up the screen. She let it ring twice before answering, unsure why her heart was doing something strange. Hello? Hi, Emma. Hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. No, you're fine. A short pause on the line. I was wondering if you'd want to get lunch sometime this week. No agenda, just lunch. Emma's first instinct was to say no, the word already forming. I don't think that's a good idea, Daniel. Why not? Because you dated Chloe. Chloe and I ended the moment I saw how she treated you, Daniel said gently. That's not a small detail to me. That's the entire reason it ended, if I'm being honest. Still, Emma said, twisting the phone cord that wasn't actually there anymore, an old habit from a landline she'd had as a kid. It feels complicated. Is it complicated because of her? Daniel asked carefully. Or because you're worried about what people might think if they found out? The question caught her completely off guard, and she didn't have a ready answer sitting anywhere close to the surface. It's just lunch, Daniel added into the silence. One lunch. No pressure, no expectations attached to it. If it's terrible, you never have to see me again, I promise. Emma found herself almost smiling, despite everything working against it. You're very persistent, you know that? I've been told that before. Yeah. After a little more gentle convincing, she finally agreed. Fine. One lunch. One lunch, he repeated, sounding genuinely happy about it. She spent almost an hour deciding what to wear that day, longer than she'd spent getting ready for anything in recent memory, annoyed with herself the entire time for caring quite so much about it. When she arrived at the small cafe Daniel had picked, tucked on a quiet side street, he was already there waiting, and the moment he saw her walk in, his whole face changed. You look great, he said simply, standing to pull out her chair. Emma looked away, flustered. Compliments still didn't sit easily on her. Not yet. But something unusual happened over the next hour. Daniel listened, actually listened, in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. He asked follow-up questions instead of waiting for his turn to talk. He remembered small details she'd mentioned in passing weeks earlier and brought them back up, unprompted, proving he'd actually been paying attention. He laughed at her jokes without once checking his phone under the table. For the first time in her adult life, Emma felt like someone genuinely wanted to know her. Not her family's name, not her parents' money, not her usefulness in a pinch. Just her, exactly as she was sitting across that small table. At one point, Daniel asked, "What do you actually enjoy doing when you're alone? Not what you're supposed to like. What you actually like when nobody's watching." Emma blinked, caught off guard by the specificity of it. "Nobody's ever asked me that before." "Then I'm glad I did," he said, meaning it. She thought about it honestly, turning her water glass slowly on the table. "I like reading. I like quiet coffee shops with bad Wi-Fi, so I can't get distracted. Sometimes I just sit somewhere and watch people go by." Why watching and not talking to them? "Because watching people is easier than being watched by them," she admitted, with a small, surprised laugh at her own honesty, like she hadn't quite meant to say that part out loud. Daniel nodded slowly, without a trace of judgment anywhere in his expression. "That sounds a little lonely, though." "It is, sometimes." There was no pity in the way he looked at her after that, just understanding. As the weeks passed, one lunch turned into two, then a standing weekly thing neither of them ever formally scheduled, then long phone calls that stretched well past midnight for no particular reason except that neither of them wanted to be the one to hang up first. A few months into whatever this had quietly, steadily become, Daniel brought up something he'd clearly been sitting with for a while. "Can I ask you something? And I really want you to hear the whole thing before you react to any of it." Emma tensed slightly, all defenses rising fast. "Okay? Have you ever thought about your health? Not your size, your actual health. I want to be really careful how I say this, because I think you're beautiful exactly as you are right now, today, sitting here. I'm not asking because I want you to change for me. I need you to know that first." Emma's expression cooled a little anyway. It was a question she'd heard 100 variations of across her entire life, and it had never once ended well before. "Please, just let me finish," Daniel said gently, reaching across the table but not quite touching her hand. "I've watched how the world treats you over these past few months. I've seen the toll it's taken, not on your body, on you. On how small you sometimes make yourself in rooms full of people who don't deserve that much power over you. If you ever decide you want to feel stronger or healthier, purely for your own sake, I will be right there with you every single day of it. And if you never want to change a single thing about yourself, I will still be right there. Either way, I need you to actually believe that." Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring at the table between them. "Sometimes I feel like no matter what I do, how kind I am, how hard I work, how much I give, people only ever see my size first, before anything else." "I know," Daniel said softly. "That's exactly why I wanted this to be entirely your decision, and only yours, not mine, not the internet's, not your aunt's, from that story you told me about Thanksgiving. Yours, completely." That conversation sat with Emma for days afterward, turning over and over in her mind at odd hours. In the past, every single attempt she'd ever made at losing weight had come from a place of pain, because someone had mocked her, because someone had made her feel unworthy of a seat at whatever table she was trying to sit at. This felt entirely different. For the first time in her life, the idea of change didn't feel like punishment for existing wrong. It felt, strangely, like an invitation. When she finally told Daniel she wanted to start, really start, not just talk about it, his whole face lit up like she'd told him something wonderful. "Then we'll do it together," he said, "every single step of it." And they did. Their mornings began before sunrise, walking laps around the park near Emma's apartment while the city was still quiet and half asleep around them. Some mornings, Emma complained the entire way, breathless and irritated. "My legs are genuinely going to fall off my body. Keep walking," Daniel would say, laughing beside her. "I'm serious. I actually hate this." "No, you don't. You just hate it today." They joined a small gym a few blocks from the apartment together. They planned meals on Sunday afternoons, badly at first, burning more dinners than either of them liked to admit out loud, laughing through most of the disasters. They celebrated small, almost invisible victories that nobody else would have noticed. An extra 10 minutes on the treadmill, a pair of jeans that finally zipped without a fight, a flight of stairs that no longer left her out of breath halfway up. It wasn't easy, not even close. Some evenings, after a brutal workout that left her legs shaking, Emma would sit down right there on the gym floor, exhausted and discouraged, close to tears. "I can't do this anymore," she said, one particularly hard night, forehead resting on her knees. Daniel sat down beside her, not touching her, just present, just there. "Yes, you can. Nothing's changing. I look exactly the same as I did 3 months ago." "Everything's changing," he said quietly. "You just can't see it yet from in here. That's how this works, unfortunately." "What if I fail?" He smiled, nudging her shoulder with his. "Then we try again tomorrow morning. That's the entire plan, start to finish. There isn't a version of this where you actually fail, because failing would mean stopping completely, and I don't think you're the kind of person who's going to stop." Week by week, the changes crept in quietly, almost too slowly to notice in the moment. Her clothes started fitting differently, looser in places that used to pull tight. She had more energy at the end of a long workday, instead of collapsing onto the couch the second she got home. She caught herself smiling at nothing in particular on her walk to work. Then months passed in a blur of early mornings and Sunday meal prep, and the transformation became impossible to ignore, not just in the mirror, but in the way she carried herself walking into rooms. The biggest change, though, wasn't physical at all. It was in the way she moved through the world. The woman who used to apologize for taking up space in a doorway now walked through it without a second thought crossing her mind. The woman who used to avoid mirrors entirely now sometimes caught her own reflection in a shop window and simply smiled at it, unguarded, before moving on with her day. She wasn't chasing anyone's approval anymore. She was, for the first time in as long as she could remember, simply living her own life. Back in her old social circle, word travels fast, and Chloe, who had cycled through 2 apartments and 3 different roommates since the breakup with Daniel, none of them working out particularly well, eventually heard through mutual friends that Emma seemed different lately, happier, lighter, somehow, in a way people struggle to describe precisely. Chloe brushed it off at first, telling herself it was nothing worth thinking twice about. Then one evening, at a mutual friend's birthday gathering, neither of them had realized the other was invited to, Chloe walked in and saw her, and the rumors suddenly made complete sense. Emma looked healthier, stood taller, laughed easier than Chloe had ever seen her laugh before. There was a version of confidence sitting in her that Chloe had genuinely never witnessed, not once in 4 years, and it unsettled her far more than she wanted to admit even to herself. "So, who's the guy?" Chloe asked, trying hard to sound casual, cornering her near the drinks table the way she used to when they still lived together. "What guy?" Emma replied evenly, not missing a beat. "Oh, come on. Someone's got you smiling at your phone like a teenager. I know that look." "There's nothing to tell," Emma said, and turned back to the conversation she'd been having before Chloe interrupted it, leaving no opening at all. Chloe pressed for weeks after that party, through mutual friends, through vague social media comments fishing for details, but got absolutely nowhere. Emma had, without even really deciding to, simply stopped explaining herself to people who hadn't earned an explanation from her anymore. It wasn't spite, not really. It was just that she'd finally learned, slowly and the hard way, the difference between privacy and secrecy, and she liked, quite a lot, how privacy actually felt. At a different gathering a few weeks later, Chloe, with a little too much wine already in her system, made a comment loud enough for a small group nearby to hear clearly. "Honestly, whoever Emma's seeing has got to be a bit heavy too," she said with a laugh, elbowing the girl standing next to her. "There's no way a normal guy's actually interested in her. No offense to her." A ripple of awkward laughter moved through the small group, right up until someone glanced nervously toward the hallway, because Emma was standing right there, having just walked back in from the kitchen, and had heard absolutely every word of it. A year earlier, a sentence like that would have flattened her for a solid week. Now, Emma simply stood there for a beat, calm and steady, letting the silence stretch just long enough for everyone in earshot to realize exactly what had happened. Then she smiled, not a fake smile, a genuinely amused one, and said, "You'll find out soon enough, Chloe," before walking past her to refill her own drink without another word. Nobody laughed after that. If a moment like that has ever happened to you, where you finally found your voice in a room that used to make you feel small, I'd genuinely love to hear about it down in the comments. And if you're new here, go ahead and subscribe, drop where you're watching from tonight, and leave a positive comment for someone else scrolling through later. This community is better because of people like you tuning in. More months passed. Emma had, by now, fully settled into the goals she'd set for herself. Not a specific number on a scale, but a feeling in her own body she'd genuinely never had before. Steady, strong, at home in her own skin, in a way that had nothing to do with anyone else's opinion of her. People notice the physical change first, always, the way people do. But what actually stopped conversations was the way she now held eye contact without flinching. The way she no longer laughed nervously just to fill silences. The way she simply took up space like it had always been hers to take in the first place. At a company event, neither of them had expected the other to attend. Chloe cornered Emma near the drinks table, unable to resist the question any longer. "Okay, I need to know, who is this guy? You've been dodging it for months now, and it's honestly driving me a little crazy." Emma considered her for a long moment, weighing something in her mind, then decided against avoiding it any further. "You already met him, actually, months ago, outside our old apartment." Chloe's face went pale as the realization slowly landed, piece by piece. "Daniel?" Across the room, Daniel caught Emma's eye from where he'd been talking with a coworker and made his way over, and the truth of the last year became impossible for Chloe to misread any longer. Chloe's voice cracked slightly. "Emma, I've known for a long time," Emma said, calm and steady, no trace anywhere in her voice of the trembling girl who once ran inside, crying over a bowl of pretzels on the front steps. "About the comments, the jokes to your friends, behind my back, for years, not just that one afternoon. What you told them the very first week we met, that you'd use me for whatever you could get and walk away the second you were done with me. That's not. Please don't insult me by lying about it now," Emma said, steady, without raising her voice at all. "I heard things over the years. I saw things I chose not to mention. I ignored most of it because I was genuinely terrified that if I ever stopped being useful to you, I'd have no friends left at all. That's the truth, and I think you already know it is." Tears welled up fast in Chloe's eyes. "I'm sorry. I know I made mistakes. I was stupid and selfish, and, please, Emma, you're my friend. You're still my friend." Emma let the silence sit there for a long moment before answering. "I forgive you," she said finally. "That part's actually true. But forgiveness was never going to mean things just go back to how they were before. I don't think you and I want the same version of that friendship anymore, if we ever really did. Here's where this story splits away from what you might be expecting by now." Emma didn't storm off in that moment. She didn't cut Chloe out of her life forever in one dramatic scene at a company party, the way you might picture it going. Instead, she did something that surprised nearly everyone who thought they knew her, including, if she was honest, herself. "I'm not going to pretend we're close again," Emma told her quietly, the party noise still buzzing around them. "And I'm not going to pretend the last 4 years didn't happen exactly the way they did. But I'm also not going to spend the next 4 years being angry about it, carrying it around with me everywhere I go. I've got better things to build with my time now." And she meant every word of it. Over the following year, Emma took the pain of every balloon comment, every whispered joke behind her back, every lunch eaten alone at a table built for 4, and turned it into something bigger than herself entirely. Using part of her own savings, money that, in another life, she might have simply handed over to Chloe without a second thought. She started a small mentorship fund at her old university, pairing incoming students who struggled socially with upperclassmen willing to simply sit with them at lunch, no strings attached. She called it, simply, the Empty Seat Project. It started small. 6 pairs of students in its first semester, meeting once a week over dining hall trays. Within 2 years, it had grown into chapters at 6 different universities, entirely through word of mouth and a small grant she'd applied for almost on a whim. She stood on a stage for the very first time at the program's 2nd anniversary dinner, hands visibly shaking despite the months of preparation, and told a room full of strangers about a bowl of pretzels, a laugh that had once cut deeper than any insult she'd ever received, and a year she spent slowly learning that her worth had never actually been up for anyone else's debate in the first place. Sitting in the very back row that night, almost unrecognizable in the crowd in a plain grey sweater, was Chloe. She didn't come up to speak to Emma afterward. She didn't need to. She simply listened, for once in her life, instead of performing for an audience, and slipped out quietly before the applause had even fully finished. Emma noticed her there, toward the back, halfway through her speech. She didn't wave. She didn't need to do that either. Some things don't require a gesture to be understood by both people in the room. Daniel was waiting for her by the door when the evening finally wound down, the same steady, quiet presence he'd always been from that very first grocery store conversation. Not the reward waiting at the end of her story, just one good, honest part of a much bigger life she'd gone ahead and built for herself, brick by brick, on her own terms. "You did that," he said softly, nodding back toward the now empty stage. "We did that," Emma said, slipping her hand into his. "But yeah, I did that." Some people mistake kindness for weakness. Some people take loyalty completely for granted, believing it'll simply outlast anything they choose to do to it, no matter how carelessly they treat it. But every heart, no matter how generous, has a limit somewhere. And what you choose to do, after you finally find that limit, says far more about who you are than the original wound ever could. Emma never got her big, dramatic confrontation moment, the kind you might have been waiting for through this whole story, and she never actually needed one. Her real victory wasn't watching someone else lose everything they had. It was refusing to let one cruel afternoon on a set of front steps decide the entire rest of her story, and instead, making absolutely sure that the next girl sitting alone under a tree somewhere never had to wait as long as she once did for someone to simply sit down beside her and ask, "Is this seat taken?" If this story meant something to you tonight, that's exactly why I make these videos. Subscribe if you're new here, tell me where you're watching from, and take 30 seconds to leave a positive comment for someone else who might need to read it tonight. It costs you nothing, and it genuinely changes someone's evening more than you'd guess. Thank you for staying until the end. See you in the next one.